There was a thought experiment that has fascinated philosophers for centuries. If you replace a ship's planks one by one, slowly over time, until every plank has been replaced with something new, is it still the same ship? The question sounds abstract, but it is not. It is a question about identity, about what makes a thing the thing it is, rather than a different thing wearing its name. Now take that question and apply it to every beloved character in fiction. Make it the engine of your entire creative strategy for a decade, and then ask yourself, at what point does this ship stop being worth caring about at all?
Winston, this ship stopped being the ship when they started selling the planks. Me not waiting 20 minutes to hear you say that.
I haven't even started yet.
Me know, me just want to set the tone.
The multiverse is not new. That needs to be said clearly before anything else, because the conversation around it tends to treat it as a recent invention when it is not. Parallel Earths and multiverses have existed in history for millenniums, since the Brahmanda Koti.
Brahmanda Koti? That sound like a takeout order, Winston. You sure we're not talking about dinner?
It would be easier if I had. The term comes from Hindu cosmology and describes a system of countless universes existing simultaneously. It was not designed as a narrative device though, only an explanation. But the concept became more prevalent in pop culture during the 1960s comics boom. DC introduced Earth 2 in a single Flash story, the idea that a different version of a familiar hero existed in a separate reality, and that the two could meet. It was a thought experiment in print form. What would the same person be if history had gone differently? The initial concept was modest, contained, and genuinely interesting. What it was not treated as was a content strategy. And over the following decades, the concept expanded organically, slowly enough that each new parallel Earth carried specific meaning. Earth 3, where heroes were villains. Earth 10, where the Nazis won the war. Each one existed to say something about the original. By contrast, the variants illuminated Earth Prime, and that was supposed to be its function. But by the 1980s, the concept had grown so complicated that DC published a 12-issue event specifically to clean it up, to collapse infinite Earths into one coherent continuity, because the proliferation had made the stories impossible to follow and the characters impossible to care about. The first major multiverse cleanup happened in 1985, not because the concept was bad, because it had already been overextended once, because the industry had already learned and then forgotten the lesson about what happens when you multiply parallel worlds faster than you can fill them with meaning. What has happened over the following 40 years is that the lesson was forgotten a second time, on a significantly larger scale, with significantly more money involved.
The fools already broke it once, fixed it, and then came back to break it again? This can't be a mistake. This got to be a hobby, man.
History repeats itself most efficiently in industries where the people who remember it have been replaced by the people who only see the upside. The Legend of Zelda built an entire mythology around 3 parallel timelines, each flowing from one pivotal moment of choice. Every iteration of Link gained meaning from the knowledge that in other branches the story had ended in failure. The alternate versions made the primary one feel chosen rather than arbitrary.
Me thought the elf boy was Zelda. Who the hell is Link?
In recent examples, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse assembled multiple versions of the same superhero, not to generate recognition, but to generate comparison. Every variant existed to sharpen one question: what made Miles Morales specifically, irreplaceably himself, when held against all the other versions who had taken different paths to wear the same costume? These two specific examples worked, not because they are old. In fact, they are not. They have been relevant for the last 5 years. They work because the alternate versions exist to deepen the specific rather than substitute for it. The multiverse was designed to serve the character, but in what followed, inverted the relationship. The character began serving the multiverse, and in that inversion is where the industry went, and where it has largely remained. Consider what the misuse actually looks like when you examine it clearly. Dragon Ball has existed since 1984. For decades, it told stories about specific people becoming more than they were through effort, failure, and the particular stubbornness of characters the audience had spent decades with. The multiverse was not part of that specific machinery because it did not need to be.
Dragon Ball used to be special, man. Me wanted yellow hair and big muscles on the bones again. Now it's about getting another transformation every episode. That make the last one obsolete. Me can't keep up.
You're referring to power creep, and that's another video for another time. Dragon Ball Super introduced 12 competing universes, a tournament for survival, alternate timelines, a version of Goku corrupted into a villain, and a reset mechanism that undid the consequences of the tournament entirely. The franchise that had built its entire emotional foundation on irreversible growth and the permanent loss adopted a framework specifically designed to make nothing permanent. The multiverse did not arrive because Dragon Ball needed it. It arrived because the trend had momentum and the franchise had an audience large enough to absorb the experiment. That is the tell. And when a story reaches for the multiverse, not because the story requires it, but because the market has decided the multiverse is currently the product, the result is always the same. The mechanics exist, but the meaning does not.
They put the multiverse in Dragon Ball, the same way they put a drive-through in a cathedral. The building is still standing, but something about what it was is gone.
This investigation initially began with DC, but it would not be convenient if it ended there. Their competitor Marvel is not far from the hot seat, and the distance between them is closing faster than the studio's press release suggests. The MCU built something genuinely unprecedented between 2008 and 2019. 23 films, one continuous narrative, and an audience trained over a decade to believe that consequence was real and permanence was possible. Tony Stark died, and that death meant something because 11 years of storytelling had made it mean something. The investment was earned, and the grief was proportionate. Then they introduced the multiverse, and with it, the quiet announcement that death, sacrifice, and consequence were now negotiable. Variants of existing characters, timeline branches, the characters you watch die can return wearing a slightly different face from a slightly different universe. And the story will treat this as wonder rather than admission of what it actually is. The admission being, nothing that happened before this point was final, which means nothing that happens after it needs to be either. The audience did not miss that signal, they absorbed it. And once an audience learns that the universe they have been emotionally investing in operates on a policy of managed reversibility, they begin watching differently, or not at all. The ones who remain may continue to watch, but not with investment, with observation. And the question stops being, what will happen to these characters, and starts being, how will this be undone? That is not just multiverse fatigue, it is a far worse reaction, a rational response to information the studio provided.
Like bringing back Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans in Avengers Doomsday.
That's right.
Honestly, Winston, me kind of glad to have them back. It wasn't the same without them.
Let's look at the Invincible War arc. Angstrom Levy was sending radicalized alternate versions of Mark Grayson to destroy Earth. It initially had the right architecture. Each broken variant existed to ask what the original chose not to become. And the concept was serving the character. The horror came from proximity, not scale. In that moment, the show understood exactly what the tool was for. But in the subsequent seasons, the multiverse elements expanded. There were now more alternate universes, more variants, and more scale. And gradually, the specificity that made the first arc land began to dissolve into exactly the kind of spectacle it had previously avoided. Not because the show stopped caring, but because the pressure toward more, toward bigger, toward the kind of content that generates headlines and clip compilations is not something any individual story fully escapes once the industry decides it is commercially necessary. Invincible understood the concept initially, and then the concept understood the industry, and the industry won, as it usually does. Here's where the investigation changes direction. Everyone is treating the multiverse fatigue as a quality problem and assumes the fix is execution. Better writing, fewer projects, more care. If you just fix the craft, the concept will recover. But consider what happens to the concept when it is associated repeatedly and publicly with a specific kind of failure. When audiences learn through accumulated experience that the presence of a multiverse is a reliable signal, not of possibility, but of managed stakes, reversible consequences, and characters assembled for recognition rather than purpose, then the concept itself becomes a warning.
Yeah, they just testing to see how many Batmans people are willing to buy. Gun Batman, tiny head Batman with big muscles, Joker Batman, pick your flavor man.
Look at this example in comparison. The plot twist ending trope was once a powerful device. Now it has been so overused, the audiences began anticipating it rather than experiencing it. I did a case study on the Chosen One archetype and how the prophecy concept structured compelling stories until every second-rate fantasy began deploying it identically. The template became visible and obvious before the stories even finished laying down their foundation. And that is a problem, because this trope lost the ability to produce whatever it was designed to produce. Recovery now requires either a long absence or genuinely subversive reinvention. Now, compare that to the multiverse. The multiverse is at its inflection point right now, and the industry has not yet answered honestly whether the damage is temporary or structural, because answering honestly would require admitting how much of it was self-inflicted, and that they failed. Here is a psychological mechanism underneath the fatigue. Emotional investment in a fictional character is not automatic. It is built through time, through accumulated understanding of how a specific person thinks and fails and recovers. That construction is the investment, and the investment is built around one specific version of a character that cannot be instantly transferred to a different version wearing the same face. When you encounter a variant of a character you have spent years with, the brain registers the resemblance and simultaneously registers the gap. It activates the original investment and immediately confirms the investment cannot be fulfilled here. The result sits in an uncanny valley between recognition and connection, close enough to feel like the real thing, but different enough to confirm it is not. When that gap is experienced repeatedly, it trains the audience to protect themselves from it by caring less in advance. This concept is called preemptive detachment. The audience learns to watch without investing because investing has been punished too many times.
You can't just copy the feeling and charge me twice. The audience paid for the original. The variant is just a photocopy ripoff. We are being charged full price for.
That's right. And once an audience understands that they are being handed a photocopy, the original starts to look like it might also be one. That contamination effect is the most damaging part. The repeated variant does not only fail to generate investment in itself, but over time, it casts doubt backwards onto the original. If this character can be replaced by a version that is functionally equivalent, was the original as specific and irreplaceable as the audience believed? The multiverse, misused consistently enough, does not just devalue the variant, it devalues the source material it is drawing from. A 2024 study found that 40% of people actively wanted fewer superhero content. The entire comic book market share fell 7 points in a single year, being outdone by Japanese manga, whose source is one single character and one coherent story. These are not numbers indicating a genre dying. They are an audience that made a judgment about a specific kind of promise being broken repeatedly, and expressed it in the only language that large institutions understand: money. Here's what is actually damaged. Not a single franchise, not the box office season, the concept itself, and with it, the audience's willingness to be moved by it. When a storytelling tool is associated repeatedly with empty spectacle, it stops being a tool and becomes a signal. The signal the multiverse now sends before a single frame plays is, the stakes here are managed, and what you're about to experience has been designed with the franchise in mind more than the story.
That what disturbing.
The tragedy is not that the concept was overused, it is that the concept genuinely deserved better. The philosophical weight it carries, what makes one specific life meaningful against the backdrop of infinite other lives, is one of the most honest questions available to fiction. The 1961 Flash story understood it, Into the Spider-Verse understood it, Everything Everywhere All at Once won the Academy Award for Best Picture by understanding it. The concept is not weak, it's just the execution was careless. It was specifically calibrated to extract maximum commercial value from the concept at the expense of everything that made the concept worth having. That is not just craft failure, that is a values failure. And the audience, without necessarily having the language for it, without being able to articulate exactly what they are responding to, registered it as exactly that. I would not claim to be exempt. Anyone building commentary around the failures of popular storytelling is in some degree dependent on those failures. The most honest thing I could say is that I would rather have less to investigate and more worth watching. However, that preference is not currently being served.
Takes guts to say that, my friend. Whole lot of YouTuber careers built on these failures. And as they say, business is booming.
The multiverse was a great idea. It asked one of the most honest questions fiction can ask. What makes your specific life the one that matters, against all the versions of it that never happened? The answer it was designed to produce was this one. This specific consequence-bearing, irreplaceable version. The answer the industry produced was any of them. All of them. Whichever one tests best. The audience noticed. And once an audience notices that, the concept cannot unknow what it taught them. But these are just my observations.
Winston, you think there is a chance it will recover?
The concept? Maybe. When someone uses it to say something true again instead of trying to sell something familiar.
And when is that?
When the industry runs out of familiar things to sell and is now forced to finally invent something new.
Oh, so never!